Former Illinois Congressman Adam Kinzinger was first elected to Congress back in 2010. And in the 12 years he served in the House, he had a front row seat to the changes within the Republican Party. His personal evolution, as well as the GOP's, is the focus of his new book, Renegade, Defending Democracy and Liberty in Our Divided Country. And Adam Kinzinger joins us now. Thank you for being with us.
You bet. Good to be with you. Thanks for having me.
And you are now one of the most prominent Republican critics of Donald Trump and Trumpism. But what strikes me is that in the book you write that you felt some responsibility for January 6th and the rise of extremism within the Republican Party. In what ways?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think it's important, if you just walk out and write something and you're trying to kind of use it as a warning, which is what I wanted this book to be, kind of a roadmap and a warning of what's wrong with America, I don't think it serves any point to say and I played a perfect role in all of this. It's important to acknowledge your own mistakes. And I look at maybe not with Donald Trump himself in terms of enabling him, although I voted against the first impeachment, which I shouldn't have, and I recognize those things. But there have been times when the Republican Party in its kind of early phases of this nationalism or populism played with fire and let that fire get out of control. And I was more than happy to take the benefits of it sometimes, which is good fundraising numbers, and keep my head down when I think it was getting out of control. So it's important to recognize that, not as but so that people can also, have a way out if they find themselves as somebody that kind of helped enable Trump or enable where we are at some point as well.
You also concede that there was a bit of political calculation in being the first to come out so forcefully against Donald Trump. And you write, in the beginning, I thought there's no way this is going to last. No way it's just going to be just me. And yet this for you has been a lonely fight. Why?
Because I think there's a lot of cowardice, and I guess I don't mean that as just a pejorative attack for no reason, just to be mean. It's truly, people I think fear more than they fear death. They fear being kicked out of a tribe, and they fear losing an identity. And if you stand up against somebody like Donald Trump and you violate this intense feeling of a party, you're gonna lose both. You're gonna lose your identity as a member of Congress. Some people just love carrying that around, and you're gonna be kicked out of a Republican tribe. And as we know, that tribal alliance, so that affiliation, carries now not just into your political job, but the friends you have, the church you go to, and everything else. And I think there were people that were hoping I would succeed and hoping Liz Cheney would succeed, but they just didn't want to be on the front lines of that. And unfortunately, I'm happy to have done it. I have no regrets in standing up, and that's why I continue to do it. But it needed to be more than just me and Liz Cheney, because unfortunately there's too many people that just continue to say that Donald Trump did nothing wrong.
You've said that you would vote for Joe Biden in 2024 if Donald Trump is the Republican nominee. Do you still consider yourself to be a Republican?
I do, because I'm not willing to give up the title yet, because I haven't changed. I mean, look, I'm kind of generally, with the exception of how some things change with age and you mature a little bit, generally have the same belief system I always have. And, and I think somebody's got to fight for the GOP. This country has two political parties. One is very sick right now. We can have one healthy party can keep democracy going for a little bit, but you ultimately have to get back to two, and we need people to stay in and fight for the Republican Party. But that doesn't mean that I'm going to hold my nose and vote for people that I know are anti-constitutional, like the GOP. I voted Democratic last election cycle, and I consider there to be one issue on the ballot in 2024 is, do you believe in democracy or not? Because without a democracy, none of these issues matter, because we're not going to be able to even have a different discussion about things.
Well, at the moment, Donald Trump is polling higher than all of his rivals combined, even with the impeachments and indictments. And the House, after a protracted and bitter battle, elevated an ultra-conservative, Trump-aligned member to serve as House Speaker. Is there a path back to moderation for the GOP, and is that something the party even wants?
Well, I don't know if the party wants it. There is a path, and that path is either going to be through a bunch of lost elections, or it's going to be through an awakening of some sort. That I don't necessarily see how an awakening would happen, but they do. It has happened before in history. So yeah, I think there's a possibility, but it's just we're not at that moment now.
Let's talk about your service on the January 6th committee, because you were reluctant, I think it's fair to say resistant initially, to serve on that committee. Why?
I didn't want to do it because I knew it would be life-changing. I knew that it would, put my family at risk. It would put my life at risk. because I knew how angry everybody was and how serious life and death they see politics at this moment. But I knew I couldn't say no because, I have a young son. He's 2 years old now. And I knew that, someday when I'm sitting him down talking to him about morals and telling him, to do the right thing even when it's hard, if I didn't do the right thing when it's hard, I would have no moral authority to tell him that.
I know from having spoken with you previously about how you learned of your committee assignment. I wonder if you can share that story.
Yeah, so, I kind of had a suspicion once Kevin McCarthy pulled all the other Republican members from the committee that I might be asked. And so I talked to Jamie Raskin, who asked me, and others if I would be willing to serve on the committee. And I said, look, I don't want to do it, but I can't say no. I mean, that's where I'm at. And I wake up one morning and I found out on a Sunday show that Nancy Pelosi had announced me as a new member of the committee, and then proceeded to call me and ask me. So I didn't have much of a choice. Thankfully, I'd made the decision to do it anyway, but you kind of see how Nancy Pelosi works after a time like that.
Yeah. Well, on a serious note, though, you write about the criticism that you received after serving on that committee, including a letter you got from a cousin of yours who accused you of treason, a word which for you has deeper resonance given your military experience and your public service. How did that criticism affect you?
So, it's funny, in the last 10 months, when I got out of Congress, I really started to understand the impact that things like that had on me. Because when you're in the middle of it, you're just operating, right? You're just acting. But I think to pretend like it didn't have an impact would be dishonest. And my whole goal in this book and everything else is to give people an honest look at, my public service, the kind of sacrifice that public service generally has, and the impact that people's words have.
The book is Renegade, Defending Democracy and Liberty in Our Divided Country. Its author is Adam Kinzinger. Thanks so much for your time.
You bet. Thank you.